Now, our next conversation is quite an interesting one. It's targeted, it's known as the 60 million tonne question. The Climate Change Committee has been pretty clear that by 2050, we need to remove 60 tonnes of carbon from the UK. Right now, we're at 0, which is quite a big stat in terms of something needing to change. So here today, we're going to be speaking about that. So I've got James Murray, the Editor-in-Chief of Business Green, and Mike Mosley, the CEO of Enfinium. So we give them a great round of applause, please.
Excellent, welcome all. First up, can you hear us okay? So the acoustics are a bit of a challenge. Up a bit, can we get it up a bit? Any better? That's a bit better. I'll talk loud, I'll do my best. Anyway, my name's James Murray, I'm Editor-in-Chief of Business Green, and we're not joined by Mike actually, we had a late apology, so his colleague Wayne Robertson has joined us. Thanks so much for joining us, Wayne, from Enfinium. We'll take some questions from the floor towards the end, but first up we're going to have a bit of a conversation around Enfinium's work in this space and the huge topic of carbon removals. Wayne, first up, Enfinium are one of those pretty large companies, quite impactful company that maybe not everyone in this room will be aware of. So who are Enfinium? What do you do, basically?
Sure, thanks very much, James, and good morning, everyone. So yeah, delighted to be here. So Enfinium, a name that many of you may not know, may not have heard of before. We're 3 years old. We're a combination of some previous energy from waste businesses in the UK, now owned by Igneo Infrastructure Partners, and we're one of the largest players in the UK energy from waste sector. So today we process just over 2 million tonnes of unrecyclable residual waste at 4 operational facilities. We've got 2 new facilities in construction, and once those are online next year, we'll be processing around about 3 million tonnes. So one of the bigger players dealing with residual unrecyclable waste in the UK.
And how did you find... thank you very much.
That was easy.
That's a good answer. we'll wrap up there. How do you define energy from waste? Because obviously, this is a sector that traditionally, from environmentalists, used to be perceived as incinerators was the term, but it has changed quite dramatically in the last 10, 15 years, hasn't it, into something that is, as you say, termed differently and is different technology.
You're right, absolutely. So there are multiple different technologies for turning unrecyclable waste into energy. New technologies coming all the time. We operate conventional moving rate incineration, so you're right, it's an incineration process. But really, if you look at the technology today and more modern facilities today, they're a world away from the conceptual mind's eye of the municipal incinerator of the 1970s, belching all sorts of things into the atmosphere. So no doubt we'll talk about that a bit more. But it's a sector which has done, if we look at the waste sector in the UK, there's actually quite a positive emissions story already. So the sector overall, and that's end-to-end recycling and dealing with residual waste, has reduced sectoral emissions by about 60% since 1990. So a really good story, and the majority of that has been moving away from landfill. I think we all understand these days a lot better the harmful effects of methane through composting biodegradable material in landfill, as well as the wider pollution. And that shift away to increasingly modern energy from waste facilities has driven down emissions. But that's kind of got us so far. The future is obviously about decarbonising the sector more. And the Climate Change Committee has been very clear in the last few years that emissions from EFW are growing. Unabated EFW needs a solution, and that's what we're focused on, is about that future piece.
So let's get to that solution. So this session is about, carbon capture, carbon removals. I mean, it seems quite an unlikely fit. Not many people would think, energy from waste, bolting on carbon removals. I mean, can you just sketch out, what is your interest in this sector and how advanced is it?
Yeah, sure. And you're right. It's a sector which has not got as much attention as some of the more maybe fashionable solutions that we see in the press around carbon removals. But it's one where we think there's a real near-term opportunity, and one that the UK and globally we can make the most of. It might just be worth starting, and Sean's intro around the 60 million tonne question, I think it's a great framing for this session, and that's a daunting number in terms of the amount of carbon removals we need to generate to get to net zero. I think everybody understands the net bit of net zero now, that to deal with sectors that are very hard to abate, we're going to have carbon removals. Everyone kind of understands that. If we look at the global numbers, I think things become even more scary. So if you look at the median IPCC pathways, they're talking about globally we're needing 10 billion tonnes of carbon removals by 2050 per year, and an enormously scary number of we need to take about 687 billion tonnes out by the end of the century. And I think that's the bit that certainly resonated with me when I got into this area a bit, and for us as a business, but for lots of others, that you think getting to net zero by 2050 is tough enough. But that'll be it. That'll be job done. We'll be there. Sadly not. We're going to have to go negative globally on a huge scale beyond 2050 to take out the CO2 that's already causing global warming. So the need for carbon removals and negative emissions beyond 2050 and getting those technologies in place is massive. And that's what sort of led us in Infinium to think about, can we play a role? And we think there's a real hidden gem here where about 50% of the content of the feedstock that we get in that's not recyclable is biogenic. If we can capture that CO2 alongside the anthropogenic fossil CO2, which is our Scope 1 emissions, capture as much of that as possible, put it into permanent storage, then we can not only decarbonise our business, first of all, but then also contribute carbon removals for the UK.
Let's keep pushing on that big picture bit for a little bit, because obviously, a lot of what you said there about, the need to definitely have these carbon removals, some of that is really contested by a lot of environmental campaigners. I mean, we run something called the Net Zero Festival, and outside we have protesters saying, net zero is not zero, was the lovely poster that I was handed as I walked into the conference. And, there is this concern that the net part of it becomes a distraction from the need to cut emissions, or that it's not going to be technically feasible. I mean, these are all critiques you will have heard. I imagine most people in this room will have heard. I mean, what's your response to those concerns from the environmentalist community that, this is a distraction from what we need to be focused on in the near term of cutting actual emissions right now?
Yeah, look, it's a really good point. I think any sector looking at carbon removals has got to deal with that challenge about what's incentivizing, what behaviors is it driving. And I think a lot of that challenge has been out of, quite frankly, some fairly dubious schemes and projects and processes that have arisen over recent years, where we've seen fairly dubious offsets, avoidance credits, companies buying so-called carbon removals by sponsoring projects in the developing world, which probably would have happened anyway, or may not produce an environmental outcome. Are you securing a bit of forestry for the future that may have degraded or not? A lot of stuff which has been unregulated, unmonitored, and has led to a big concern that there's an easy way out for corporates. They can just go and fairly cheaply per ton buy all these things and say, hey, I'm carbon neutral, I'm carbon negative, and we've seen that sort of thing, and that's quite rightly given rise to concern that that's not really delivering what we need to. What I'd say is you draw the distinction between those kind of schemes and what we absolutely need to get to net zero and to get into that negative territory beyond that I talked about is verifiable, measurable, durable carbon removals that are clear and that last, that can be measured, that are sustainable in their sourcing, and we'll come on and talk about that as well. But that as part of the mix, and having corporates, organizations and countries having those as part of the plan, not in substitution for reducing their own emissions, but as part of the overall plan, I think is essential. But we've got a big job to do to make that clear and get rid of some of the bad practices that have been in the sector.
So the next obvious question is then how? How do you go about doing that? So I want to go onto the technology in a sec, but let's assume that you have the technology, it is removing a degree of carbon from the atmosphere. How do you demonstrate to someone that that's rock solid, that's true, it is being removed, and deal with those those well-meaning concerns that you just touched on?
I'm glad you won't spend too long on the technology, because I'm not from the engineering fraternity, but what I do know from talking to all the clever people that we've got in the sector is the capture technology is there. There are new forms of capture technology coming all the time that will be more efficient, will use less energy, but the capture technology is there. It's obviously, as many people know, it's been used in the oil and gas industry for controversial purposes around enhanced oil recovery for many years, but the capture technology is there. The biggest thing we need from an infrastructure point of view in the UK is the transport and storage networks. That's why getting the initial clusters away this year that the government are trying to do, getting those first clusters up and running is going to be a key step. But yeah, let's come back to the carbon removals question and verifying it. So through that technology, you can measure and meter exactly every ton of compressed CO2 that you're putting into the pipeline. There is clear measurement about putting that into geological storage, and there are monitoring regimes to make sure it stays there and to check for emissions from any of those fields, aquifers that are used. So if you compare it to maybe a forestry scheme where you might not necessarily know 10 or 15 years down the line how many trees grew, was there a forest fire, did they disappear? At that sense, the verifiability and durability of the removals is up there with the gold standard, we would say.
Yeah. So you can prove it, you can rubber stamp it. I suppose the other end of it is where the feedstock's coming from and proving that is organic and sustainable. Because obviously if you're, as I understand it, if it's a waste from energy plant that's just burning plastic, then that's not going to create negative emissions because that's from a fossil fuel. But if it's burning potentially sustainable timber or other forms of organic waste, then you potentially start to get those negative emissions. Presumably that part of it's a little bit harder to quantify.
It is a bit harder to quantify, but it's really, really important. For any form of bioenergy, CCS, pathway to carbon removals, the challenge is around the feedstock and the sourcing of that feedstock. So obviously if we look at the range of technologies, direct air capture, that's pretty clear in terms of what it does. It needs a lot of energy, so there's a question around the energy and that renewable energy that's required, but essentially it's the same thing, putting CO2 into storage. And then for bioenergy pathways, as you say, it's absolutely about the feedstock. So I don't want to divert too much into kind of waste policy in the UK, but if I talk in broad terms where we are today and where we need to go. So today we've got about 27 million tonnes of unrecyclable waste produced in the UK. About 16 million tonnes of that is now going to EFW. We've still got around 8-9 million tonnes going to landfill. So the job's not quite done on ending landfill. About 6 million tonnes of that has biodegradable content in, so we've got to finish the job and stop landfill. And we're still exporting 1 or 2 million tonnes of waste overseas as well, and that's another thing we need to look at. In the future, the government has now set out, under the Environment Act last year, the long-term targets for reducing that waste and increasing recycling. So in the sector, that's priority number one. We need to get into the top tier of recycling nations. That ambitious target is to reduce per capita residual waste by 50% by 2042. If we can do that, we've got an implied recycling rate of 75-80%. All of the initiatives around pulling plastic out of the waste stream will start to have an effect, hopefully. But we will still have 17 million tonnes odd of unrecyclable stuff left that we need to deal with. So our view is that if we can shape the fleet and shape a decarbonised fleet, the prize there is kind of somewhere between 8 and 10 million tonnes of carbon removals from the sector, which is about a sixth of the UK target by 2050.
So this is a really important point, isn't it? Because your argument would be that even decades down the line, there will still be unrecyclable waste that we need to process somehow. Because one of the other critiques of this approach, and this is from energy and waste in general, is does it kind of lock in this idea that maybe we don't need the circular economy as much, that we can continue to produce and then just offload the waste? I mean, your argument would be that all these targets suggest not, that there's always going to be a significant quantity there that these plants aren't going to end up as stranded assets there. That process does need to continue.
It does, but we need the right amount of capacity and not too much. There's a very live political debate going on at the moment around EFW capacity and the permitting pause that's been put on by DEFRA, and lots of debate around what's the right amount of capacity. But there isn't any more debate around we're going to need some capacity to deal with waste, because the options are only landfill, some sort of treatment facility, or exporting. That's all we can do with it. So the really key thing when you look at that question for the sector is how do we get there, how do we have the right amount of capacity? But you're right, when I came into the sector 10-15 years ago, I probably thought we'll be zero waste. At some point in the future we won't have any waste. We should have an economy where there isn't any, and we shouldn't lose sight of that goal. But I think what everyone now realises is we're not going to be there in time to deliver decarbonisation and achieve all the recycling targets. So in the next 30-40 years, until we reach that point, there's a prize here if we can put carbon capture into these facilities. The National Infrastructure Commission has got onto this in their last assessment last year and said that in the future all the FWs need to be CCS delivered, CCS ready. We need to decarbonise them, and we've got to transition the fleet so we've got the right amount of capacity, not too much to impact on recycling, the right amount of capacity, but delivering decarbonisation.
And how big an opportunity is this? So you mentioned potentially, if we hit all those targets, we're looking at circa 17 million tonnes of feedstock going in. We need 60 million tonnes of carbon removals by 2050, according to the CCC. What kind of contribution are we talking about potentially from this sector?
So let's say there's a lot of debate at the moment around whether that 50-50 biogenic, non-biogenic split at the moment will change in the future. There's lots of policies going on around pulling plastic out. That should drive up the biogenic content. We're also quite early looking at pulling pure food waste out of the general waste stream. That might push it down. But the general expectation is that might go up a little bit. But even if we stick with the 50-50, and broadly 1 tonne of waste generates 1 tonne of CO2 through an incineration process, then it's about half of that 17 million. If the whole fleet was able to deliver carbon capture and capture 90-95% plus, you're looking at circa 8 million, 8.5 million, 9 million tonnes, which is a material chunk of the UK's need.
So up well over 10%, 15% of the carbon removal capacity could be from these projects potentially. So
yeah, and from stuff that we're going to have to deal with anyway. And I think that's the bit on the feedstock. When you look at our other bioenergy to CCS projects which rely on wood, waste wood, wood pellets, whatever. There is a lot of controversy around how much space does that take. Is it really just waste wood? What's the impact on land use or whatever? So I think the great thing is this is a homegrown thing that we need to see as a resource. It's an energy resource, so that we generate power from all these facilities. And it's partially renewable. That's good. The job's been done for a while, but there's a carbon removals prize here as well.
Yeah, excellent. We could go back and forth on the moral hazard and complex modelling questions for literally hours and hours. But I want to get on to let's take this as read that you're right, that there is a potentially significant role here for energy from waste in enabling carbon removals. What's happening next? What needs to happen from here? Let's start with Enfinium yourselves. You're one of the bigger players in the market. How advanced are your plans to start to make this vision happen?
Yeah, no, very good. So if I deal with what needs to happen first, so I think where I'd start is, in the UK we've got to take that first step, that most difficult step of getting carbon capture and storage up and running. And as I mentioned, those first two clusters heading for FID later on this year, really complex arrangements with transport, storage, and then emitter projects leading into those through pipelines.
Sorry, just to interrupt you. Do you think that will happen this year? Because obviously potentially an election, who knows, in 2 months' time, in 6 months' time. I mean, are you fairly confident that DESNZ will get this done? Because we've been waiting a long time for those final investment decisions to come through for these projects.
Look, it's not difficult to be cynical around carbon capture. We've been here before. it's
default setting.
It's absolutely right. We've been here before. We've tried and failed before, and there's a lot of institutional memory around. We haven't got there. From what I see, from when we talk to the teams in DESNZ, they've had teams of people really working very, very hard for years to make this happen. When we talk to politicians on all sides, I think everybody realises that it's absolutely key. It's not easy at all. There is not a lot of spare government money, and there is a subsidy element to getting these things off the ground. I think very soon they will fund themselves once we look into carbon price, etc. But getting this off the ground needs subsidy, and government money is short. But everything we're hearing says that there is a real commitment to get these things done. As you say, in a challenging year with a general election coming at some time in the next few months, you always worry about those things, but there is a lot more momentum than we've ever seen to get those things there, and that will be a really crucial first step to start building confidence that it's real. Because there's a lot of the man on the street still says you're going to capture the CO2 and pump it under the ground, and is this real? We need to make it real and prove the concept.
And probably important to note that if there were a change in government, the opposition have been pretty positive on this agenda as well. This is an area where there is a degree of consensus, it seems.
It does seem that there is broad support for it. It's about the funding and the structures and getting through all that complexity. But yeah, you're right.
So let's talk about that a little bit then. So what do you need to happen? I understand you have a couple of plans at the blueprint stage. You're kind of potentially ready to go. What needs to happen to get these projects built and demonstrating that it can and does work?
Yeah. So where are we? So probably if I touch on where waste to energy is in the whole carbon capture scene at the moment. So waste to energy was a relatively late addition into the business models that the government's developed around the first carbon capture phases. So you've got power business models, industrial business models, and waste was included fairly late on as an addendum to the industrial carbon capture CFD model only in late 2021. So waste was a fairly new entrant into the whole scheme. Really encouraged for the sector that there are, out of the first 8 emitter projects that were selected 18 months ago, 2 of those are energy from waste projects. So Viridor's project at Runcorn and Cyclus' project at Protos, both linking into the HyNet cluster. So encouraging that the technology has been seen to add good value, because that's been assessed against other technologies and other sectors. This is value for money. So we've been 2 years really doing feasibility work with capture suppliers, looking at our land availability requirements, looking at transport and storage options, and really delighted that we submitted our bid for our Park Adford facility up in North Wales, submitted that into the HyNet expansion programme just at the end of March, and we will hear in the summer if we've been down selected to participate in the HyNet scheme. So we're up and running with the first project we've got. The really big issue for the UK, I think, is expanding beyond those clusters, and how do we come up with a long-term plan to build out those networks of pipelines. We think not everywhere is going to be able to get a pipeline in time. We need to look at rail solutions, barge solutions, other solutions for transporting CO2. Sounds like a bit of a fantasy world, but these projects are coming in Europe. And if you look at what we've done around gas networks over the last 70, 80, 90 years, we need something similar in terms of CO2 pipelines and networks. So that's really interesting, because obviously one of the upsides of energy from waste with carbon capture is it's happening anyway. You have biogenic emissions that can be captured.
I suppose one of the potential challenges is they are dotted all around the country, and once you've captured the carbon, it's got to go somewhere. But your argument would be is obviously the sector knows this. There are potential solutions to that, even transporting by boat, by rail. That's something you would be factoring in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're relatively lucky. So we've got our Park Avenue facility is obviously very close to Hynet. Our Ferrybridge facilities, our two largest plants in the fleet, are pretty well sited for the Humber and East Coast clusters. Our Kemsley facility in Kent is right on the coast, so very good for a marine shipping option. But you're right, a lot of EFW plants are in the centre of the country and some of them in urban areas, so that's why we need to look at those connection spurs. It might be rail to a major pipeline spur. There's probably a need as well when we start planning out what the fleet of the future needs to look like, is we need to think not about, we've traditionally put these things where the waste is or where local authorities can get planning permission to put them. We need a national plan about where do we want this fleet of the future, and as we are replacing some of the older fleet built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, which struggles to meet emission levels, we need to start siting the new facilities in the best possible place for carbon capture.
And that will become, I presume, part of the planning process for the whole sector. It will be, can this plug into the hubs? Can this take the carbon away relatively quickly? Have you looked at all at one of the other areas that's fascinating in this space is utilisation? I mean, is that something you've looked at, of finding something to do with the carbon? There's lots of, I'm sure many companies down here doing some incredible things, turning captured carbon into fuel or carbonated drinks or the like. Is that something you're considering?
It is, absolutely, and I think an area that's really growing rapidly. As you say, the number of technologies and users really growing fast. Certainly for our more central plants that are probably maybe more than 10 years away from a transport and storage solution for storage, absolutely we'd look at that. And if people sort of wonder if this is real, I was just talking to colleagues about half an hour ago around, there's a project in the Netherlands, the Twente project, which they're in full commissioning of a 100,000 tonne capture plant on an EFW at the moment. Nowhere near a pipeline, nowhere near a transport solution. They're using all of that 100,000 tonnes in industrial uses, in fuels, in sequestration, in building materials, in agriculture. So looking at how we can utilise that and not just waiting for the storage or the transport and storage solution to arrive, very important.
It's we report about it all the time on Business Green. It's a fascinating space, the innovation that's going on there. Every time you look at these technologies, you think, if that works, then we really have potentially solved a huge part of the problem. I suppose that brings us to another potential part of the problem, though, is that would give you an additional revenue stream. The other big critique of carbon capture and storage in all its forms is the cost, is the economic rationale here. How do you see that panning out? Well, I mean, what level of subsidy do you think the first projects will need? Do you see a route to future cost reduction? Because in the current economic climate, the government is somewhat reluctant to sign off on big ticket items.
Yes, very diplomatically put, I think, on that. Yeah.
There are other ways of putting that. Yeah. Chronic underinvestment for a decade. But anyway, moving on.
Absolutely. Look, I think the cost will come down. I think if you look at any similar technology pathway, the cost will come down. The more players get into the sector, the more different alternative technologies develop, the costs will come down. For our sector, the real big commercial driver that we think there are two that will underpin this. So the sector is due to be included in the emissions trading scheme from 2028, the government announced last year. We're waiting for a lot of the detail about how that's going to work to come out later on this year, but that will create, so putting a carbon price on waste effectively that will pass up to the producer of the waste from our facilities is going to create an incentive to decarbonise, which is exactly what it's designed to do. And then the carbon removals potential, why that's so important for us is not just about creating a lovely revenue stream, that's about underpinning the investment in building these facilities, which, as you say, are not cheap. So yes, the costs are high. I always say to people who say, this is way too expensive, that I only think it's expensive because we haven't yet worked out as a country or as a planet what the costs of dealing with horrendous climate change are and mitigation. And it's only because we haven't really worked out what the cost of flood defences, relocating cities, or all of the things we're going to have to do if we don't do this are, and compare them. So it's how you compare that. It's going to need a huge investment from the whole economy.
Although, as I understand it, Claire Coutinho is going to be giving a speech soon, and she's briefed the Telegraph talking about people want to decarbonise, but not at any cost. And there are these cost concerns. I suppose the benefit for your project's case is that carbon price. Is once you're in the emissions trading scheme, your CFO is presumably looking at a cost of whatever it is currently, 60, 70, potentially going up to £100 a tonne. That must focus the minds. That's where the primary business case for this will rest.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you talk about other enablers. So in terms of carbon pricing and what we need going forward, I mean, if we step back for a second and look at the ecosystem that we need to create around carbon removals generally, I'm not just talking about energy from waste, but the ecosystem that we need to create is one, I liken it to, if we say the sort of global financial system has been built over the last 100 years, not that there weren't banks before that, but let's say it's 100 years. We need to build an ecosystem like that in 10 years for carbon, because we need verification. We need registries for carbon removals so they're tracked so we don't double count them. We need assurance. We need tradability cross borders. We need to build all of that in a very short space of time. And for energy from waste, you're right, the trigger will be that carbon price, but we need some long-term consistency and policy around that as well, because you'll know better than me, the UK ETS price has diverged quite a lot from the European. There's a big gap there. That may cause us issues in a whole range of industries if we have too much divergence. And at the end of the day, that's the market controlled by government at the moment. They set the number of allowances that are released. We need a longer-term consistent pathway so we can predict those prices more accurately. But they do need to be at a level to support the investment. Otherwise, the drive won't be there.
And given this is carbon removals, would you be selling credits as well? Would that be part of the model that you'd potentially have kind of a government long-term contract with a degree of subsidy? You'd be avoiding the carbon price, but then would you on top of that be able to go, here's some carbon credits we can sell to a company that wants to be net zero?
Absolutely fundamental for us that we can monetize it to make those projects work. So I think very interestingly, the government, when it published its CCS roadmap in December, their view very clearly is that subsidy is not here for long. They want to sort of get the initial clusters underway, but their view is that by 2030 and beyond, this needs to be self-sustaining and financeable from carbon removals. But I guess also in relation to waste, it's that gate fee differential, that if you're not paying ETS because we're capturing the carbon, then we can create value from that gate fee for the feedstock, which allows the investment in the technology as well. So we're very much looking at how does this work on a non-subsidy merchant basis and when can that work?
You really are right at the crux of so many different debates in this space. So presumably then the conversations at the moment in the voluntary carbon market and the various carbon credit space, you must be watching those very closely. I mean, what do you think needs to happen there to give businesses the confidence to continue to invest in this space? Because there's been a few horror stories, as you mentioned, you touched on yourself earlier.
Yeah, they have, and I think that's done a lot of damage, to be honest, to the sector, and created a lot of unhelpful noise around verifiability. At the same time, if you look at 2023, I think was a bit of a breakthrough year around the voluntary market and some of the bilateral deals that have been done. So if you look at a lot of the big technology companies, there is a race going on at the moment for the first big tech, one of the US big tech companies, the race to say that they're the first company to have eliminated all of their historic emissions since they were founded through verifiable routes, not through sort of dubious ones. So you've seen the likes of Microsoft and Amazon and Google investing heavily in larger scale, not quite at the scale we need yet, but bigger scale projects. Microsoft last year, probably a breakthrough deal with Ørsted, 2.8 million tons of carbon removals over 10 years to fund and finance a bioenergy plant in Scandinavia to do carbon capture. And to be honest, those things are fantastic drivers for the sector, but those voluntary deals are not going to get us the kind of scale that we've been talking about. So we need to move to those regulated markets for carbon removals as quickly as possible, and that's about doing all the things I talked about, like the financial market, about assurance and verification and standards globally. So,
and how would you envisage energy from waste competing in that market? Because there's now a plethora of different technologies. There's sort of, there's people doing enhanced rock weathering on fields. We've got ocean projects. We've got direct air capture removals. We've got biomass energy and storage, and then obviously all the many nature-based projects. I mean, I'll give you a brief moment for a sales pitch. What's the kind of the pros, the merits, the pros and cons, if you will, actually, of the energy from waste approach in that what is going to become quite a competitive environment, I imagine?
Yeah, you're right. Look, I will do the sales pitch, but I would genuinely say we need every technology we can get.
We need them all.
We need everything and more when you look at those numbers. So, I would never, talk about other technology. We need everything we can get.
Because even at maximum, you'd only do 8 to 10% or whatever it was, 15% at most.
Yeah. Look, and that's a material amount for the UK.
Yeah.
And, every million tons is very, very important. But, we need those technologies to come through as well, and they need support. For energy from waste, what I would say is the sales pitch is this is something which is here now. These facilities are here. The core plants don't need to be built. They're there. retrofitting carbon capture is doable. The tech is here at the right readiness level, and we've got a sort of unseen prize in terms of that biogenic waste, that if we can capture the CO2, it's near term, and it doesn't, a lot of technologies are going to take a long time to come through and be investable. Direct air capture is, again, you talk to the man on the street, hoovering the stuff out of the air sounds perfect, and everyone gets that. But it's hugely energy intensive, and it's difficult to get the volumes that you need at scale. It's coming, we need it, but we need everything. Energy from waste is here now and can start doing the job quicker than a lot of other technologies.
And relatively quickly, I mean, that, everything about climate change is a race. We are running out of time. I mean, what sort of time frame do you reckon you could get, if all goes well, when are you going to have projects effectively removing emissions from the air up and running?
Good question. So the first step is we're building the UK's first pilot plant up at Ferrybridge with our partners HZI. We're going to have the first pilot doing this from energy from waste. Yes, very small scale initially, but we need to test the flue gas. The first EFW pilot for carbon capture is going to be online this summer, so we will be piloting it. In terms of the first of the projects, so Park Adfer, we think if we get through that process this year for the Track 1 expansion of the HyNet, we could be built by 2029. That's 200,000 tonnes of removals. And this week, well, I won't give any of the good details away, but we'll be publishing our net zero transition plan this week, which is going to set out the pathway for all of our facilities and when we think we can deliver in line with the government's cluster programme, which will give us an ambitious target of us getting to net zero as a business and then into negative by the early 2030s. So that's a really ambitious plan. It needs a lot of things in the UK to come together, particularly the transport and storage bit, but it is doable. The technology is here and the funding is here. When we talk to our investors, they want to decarbonise businesses, and there is a lot of investment looking for a home in kind of verifiable decarbonisation activity, whereas they probably wouldn't be investing now in building lots of new unabated EFWs because we need to move beyond that. Yeah. So investment money is there to do it as well.
So this is absolutely potentially making a contribution to our 2030 targets. If Labour were to come in and say we want to decarbonise the power sector by 2030, this is something that could, be making a meaningful contribution within those types of timeframes.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's good to talk about it on the grid because obviously we export power to the grid. Doing CCS will take up some of that power, so we'll have a bit less to export, but the benefit is that the energy we do put onto the grid after that is carbon negative. So if you look at it from a whole grid point of view, we're actually reducing the carbon emissions of the grid overall.
And stable power. We're not allowed to say baseload anymore, that debate's moved on, but it's reliable, consistent power.
Stable, reliable, 24/7. Yeah.
I did say we'd have some questions, and I just realised I haven't come up here with a iPad, so I can't take any Slido's questions. So shall we do this old school? Does anyone have any questions they want to yell at me? Oh no, we have a microphone, even better. We have a lady with a microphone. So you have a round of applause to pose your question. Make it a good one.
Backdrop of 60 million tonnes in the UK and billions of tonnes globally, and how hard it sounds, what drives you to achieve? And are you part of some sort of grand project plan of any kind?
Yeah, very, very good question. I think when we created Infinium 3 years ago, we had an opportunity to sort of build an organisation from scratch because we were a combination of different organisations. And I think as a management team, we consciously decided that we wanted to really put sustainability at the heart of what we did. There is a survival of business opportunity here that we think if we don't decarbonise, then we won't have a business in 10, 15 years time. So there's a business reason to do it, but we think that as organisations going forward, it's going to become quite simple. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And if we stand still, we're part of the problem. But when we've got into this, there's a great opportunity there to be part of the solution. And it's challenging. For us, we liken it to delivering these projects at our facilities is a bit like putting someone on the moon for us, and it feels like that for the country and the planet. But I'm not going to sit here in 20, 30 years time and go, we gave up or we didn't try. So the opportunity's there. And the more you get into it, you come to events like this and you realise how much momentum is building about not just talking about doing this stuff, but actually making it happen. It encourages you. You might have another 320 days of the year where it seems really tough, and government policies maybe it's all too difficult. Net zero is a drag, and it's going to cost the country too much, and we can't afford it, and whatever. I don't fancy telling my grandkids that we gave up. So I think we've got to give it a go.
That's interesting. You mentioned you've been with the business for quite some time. Has that been a shift? Are we seeing an evolution now where even in sectors that traditionally maybe weren't as concerned with this agenda now feel, we need a credible net zero strategy that this is now part of doing business. We can't not.
It's been a phenomenal shift in the last 3, 4, 5 years, I think. And the sector before that was, we deal with waste. We're a sanitary service. We deal with stuff that's better than going into landfill. That's our job, is to deal with the stuff that society produces. And that's, in itself, that was doing a job. But it's shifted very rapidly to, this technology has done a good job, but it's emitting a lot of CO2 today, and we can't have that carry on for a day longer than it needs to. We've got to find an answer. And I think, companies move quicker than others, but I think lots of people in our sector have seen that that's got to be the way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Any further questions from the gentleman here?
Thank you both. Ben from National Grid. Interested in costs today per tonne captured if you were to just add a CCS unit to one of your plants.
Yeah, very, very good question. I think if we look at ranges, and a lot of this is published about sort of costs of different technologies. So if you look today, I would say the average cost per tonne of deploying capture probably £120 to £150 per tonne. We need to get it lower than that. The carbon price where it is today is not going to support that investment. We need to get it, in the first stage, we need to get that to 60 to 70 pounds a tonne, and that's capture and TNS cost. And the big unknown at the moment is where the clusters are. Is there's not a lot of clarity yet on what your transport and storage costs. So the storage operator, what they're going to charge you to put your tonne under the North Sea or in Liverpool Bay. So there's a bit of lack of clarity on that. But we need to get it at today's carbon prices to that sort of range to make it work. Now it's more competitive than others. It's cheaper than direct air capture, but it's still too expensive, and we've got to work on getting that cost down.
So effectively you need to halve the cost as quickly as possible, but equally you are relatively confident with the right transport infrastructure there is a pathway for that scale of emissions reductions.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's also worth noting that a few years ago when people were talking about CCS, they were talking 200 plus a tonne. There has already been quite substantial progress. Maybe time for one last question if anyone has one.
Could I just follow up on that?
If it's incredibly brief, sir.
So you kind of mentioned the CCS technology is quite mature now, and that oil companies have been doing it since the 70s, 80s. Do you think that kind of cost reduction is realistic?
I do, because we see a number of new technologies coming through. So the kind of traditional amine based solvent technologies that have been around, they're relatively mature. They haven't been done across all the technologies, and with different flue gases you need to test them. But there are lots of interesting new technologies coming forward that aren't amine reliant, and amines are not the greatest substances to deal with. So we're encouraged that there are lots of new technologies coming forward. If you look at companies like Sea Capture, who are working on different methodologies to capture that don't involve amines, there's a lot of R&D going on into better, more efficient, less power using technologies, and that should bring the price down.
Excellent. Well, that's something to hope for. Thank you so much. Oh, geez, there we go. Finish as I mean to go on. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you found that interesting. It's an absolutely fascinating space, hugely, hugely important, and definitely one to watch in the coming years as the net zero transition continues. Huge thanks to Wayne for stepping in, and thanks you all for your attention and your questions.